Okay, so it's the contrasting of the CPI and GDP deflator now that um, becomes the reason why there is a particular divergence in the graph that we have seen no, a while ago. Okay, so the first contrasts no, of CPI and GDP deflator is that GDP deflator reflects the prices of all goods and services produced domestically, whereas the consumer price index reflects the prices of all goods and services bought by consumers. O, sana sa ilang difference. For example, suppose no, that the price of an airplane produced by Boeing and sold to the Air Force rises, meaning to say, nagmahal ang airplane. So even though the plane is part of the GDP, it is not part of the basket of goods and services bought by a typical consumer. Thus, the price increases shows up in GDP deflator but not in the consumer price index. Sumuon ay usa ka rason nga nung naa sila'y difference, naa sila'y a moment wherein there is a divergence no, in the graph that we have seen a while ago. Sumana siya usa sa rason. The second reason is the consumer price index compares the price of a fixed basket of goods and services to the price of the basket in the base year, while GDP deflator compares the price of currently produced goods and services to the price of the same goods and services in the base year. Now, the second difference concerns how both measures how various prices are weighted to yield a single number for the overall level of prices. Okay? Thus, the group of goods and services used to compute the GDP deflator changes automatically over time. This difference is not important at all if or when all prices are changing proportionately. No? So kung proportion ra ang changes of prices no, of goods and services, di ra kaya siya, the difference is not that really material. But if the prices of different goods and services are changing by varying amounts, the way we weigh the various prices matters for the overall inflation rate. So, di ra kaya siya material or dili siya kaayo not technically not important, but of less importance if the prices are changing proportionately. It will only matter if they are changed or the prices are changing by varying amounts. So, going back, no, diba, actually, they move. No, they move at the same direction. They only have a few diversions at some point in time. Tungod lagi sa ilang differences. Okay? Kuha? I hope so. Okay, so here is another example. No? So, contrasting the CPI and GDP deflator still. Now, the figure here shows inflation rate as measured by both the GDP deflator and the consumer price index for each year since 1965. Now, you can see that sometimes the two measures diverge here. Now, when they do diverge, it is possible to go behind these numbers and explain the divergence with the two differences that we have discussed. No? Pwede ni mo tan-awon dito based on what we have discussed on the contrasting nature of the CPI and GDP deflator. Now, For example, in 1979, pang taon na to, 1979, asa na? Dinhing dapita. Diba? Asa naman yung pen? Nakalimot naman ko. Dara. So, asa ang 1979? Somewhere here. Diba? Kaya na. So, in 1979 and 1980 year, CPI inflation spike up more. O, diba? Kana akong kani, diba? Nang spike up more siya compared to GDP deflator. Ha? And that is because oil prices more than doubled during these 2 years. Yet divergence between these two measures is the exception rather than the rule. So in 1970s, both the GDP deflator and the consumer price index show high rates of inflation. So kani 1970s from 1970s to 1975, so it shows a high rate of inflation, while in 1980s din nag-start to 2000, both measure shows low rates of inflation. Okay? So, dako siya, this is actually of good use, kanang analyzing the CPI and GDP deflator so that you will come up with a good business decision. Say, for example, you will become an economist, an economic advisor of the Philippines. So at least now, being familiar with this, being familiar with how to peruse, graphs such as this, because you have basic knowledge, and of course advanced knowledge if you're ever going to become an economic advisor of the Philippines. So you will make wise decisions out of your interpretation of this data. Okay? Okay, so let's nagkuan ko. Wait ha. Pasigo ako nag-record ay. Okay. So let's go to your activity or active learning number 3, CPI versus GDP deflator. Okay? So, in each scenario, determine the effects on the CPI and the GDP deflator. So, first scenario is Starbucks raises the price of Frappuccino. B. Local manufacturer raises the price on industrial tractors it produces. And C. Armani raises the price of the Italian jeans it sells in the Philippines. Okay? So, again, all your activities. So, you have no activity 2, kaya nakalimot ko. So, you have activity 1, and of course, this active learning 3, active learning 1, and active learning 3. Okay? So, I will make a submission link in Moodle later. Okay. Now, let's proceed. Now let's go to correcting variables for inflation, which is the first one is comparing dollar figures from different times. Okay, so the purpose now of measuring the overall levels of prices in the economy is to allow us to compare dollar figures from different times. But wait, why do we need to do it? Why do we need to compare monetary figures from different times? Ngano kaha? And that would be your first assignment. Okay? So your first assignment is I want you to make a brief explanation, essay, or however you are going to term it. No? So as long as you're going to explain, no, why we need to compare monetary figures from different times. Again, all submissions should be in model. Okay. Now that we know how price indexes are calculated, now CPI, deflator, GDP deflator, whatever it is, now let's see how we might use such an index to compare a dollar figure from the past to a dollar figure in the present. So using all those indexes that we have learned, we are going to use it in order to compare a dollar figure from the past to the present. Now, we first return to the issue of Babe. Remember mo ni Babe Ruth, no? Kung Babe nga salary. So, was his, di ba sa introductory story na to, naman ko gipakita dito kang Babe Ruth. So, the question was his salary of $80,000 in 1931 high or low compared to the salaries of today's players? So to answer this question, we need to know the level of prices in 1931 and the level of prices of today. Part of the increase in baseball salaries compensates players for high prices today. So, di ba, usa sa one of the reason, no, there is an increase in salaries, not just in baseball, even in another, another work, kuan ba? Of course, is to compensate, no, the player, the worker, no, for the higher prices that we are facing today. So, to compare Babe's salary to those of today's player, we need to inflate, no, Babe's salary to turn $1931 into today's dollars. So, inflate ang salary ni Babe, no, in order that we will turn the $1931 into today's dollar, so as per equivalent or value. So the formula for turning dollar figures from one year into another or present is T, no? Kaning butang na to og amount in year T dollars. Okay? So, what is a formula? So, amount in today's dollar equals amount in year T dollars times price level today over price level in year T. Okay? A price index such as the consumer price index measures the price levels and thus determines the size of the inflation correction. Now, let's apply this formula to Babe's salary. So, government statistics shows a consumer price index data available as seen here. Now, so we have this data. Kani. We have this data available. Okay? So, let's apply Babe's salary to this. Now, from this data, we can safely say that the overall level of prices has risen by a factor of 14.1. Nga naman, giunsa pagkuha ang 14.1. Using the formula, so of course, amount in today's dollar equals amount in year T dollars. What is the amount in year T dollars? That is 80,000. Wait. Okay, so diba, we get the 14.1 by dividing 2 and 4 of 2009 over 15.2 of 1931, because we have this. Now, price level today over price level in year T. Okay, betan ang na to og sakto ba? 14.1 ba? Asa ram nihong calculator? Okay, so we have 214.5 divided by 15.2, and that will give you 14.111. So write it off. So we have 14.1. So sakto. Diba? So using these numbers to measure base salary in 2009 dollars would give us this. So mana ni, salary in 2009 dollars equals salary in 1931 dollars times price level in 2009 and price level in 1931. So 80,000. So diba? Here we have the minimum wage in TU was 80,000. So 80,000 times 214.5 over 15.2 would give us 1,100, I say, 1,000 ka dyan, 1,128,947. Okay, so maunay gihatag ni nato. We find that Babe salary in 1931 is equivalent to a salary of today, the salary today of over $1 million. That is a good income, but it is less than a quarter of the median Yankee salary today, and only 3% of what the Yankees pay A-Rod. Kailan mong A-Rod? Si Alexander Rodriguez, one of the famous professional baseball player. So, ang salary ko ni Babe Ruth, no, is a good income that year in 1931. But it is less than a quarter of the median, no, Yankees salary. So, less than a quarter ko, no. And only 3% of what, so ang isang 1 million 3% ra na. So 3% ra na siya sa gidawat sa professional baseball player karon nga si Alexander Rodriguez. So although mo ingon ta nga dako og sweldo si Babe Ruth, which is 1 million by 1931, ig-abot sa karon nga panahon, 2009, 3% ra na siya sa gidawat sa mga baseball player sa 2009. So mo na siya. Okay? Various forces including overall economic growth and increasing income shares earned by superstars have substantially raised the living standard of the best athletes. So, usas ko no sa mga rason, no, nga nag-raise the living standard of the best athletes there is the overall economic growth and the increasing income shares earned by superstars. Okay? So, mana siya. Here is another example. So, we have 1964 and 2010. So, in year T, 1964, and today is 2010. So, the minimum wage was 1.15 in year T. CPI is 13.3 in year T. CPI is 220.3 today. So we have how much $8.09, meaning to say the minimum wage now in 1964 is $8.09 in today's 2010. Okay, so what is that? So interpreting the result, no, the 1.15 minimum wage in December 1964 could have purchased 8.0 worth of goods and services if prices in 1964 equal their December 2010 level. So, og pilay mapalit, no, sa $1.15 nga minimum wage in 1964, ang mapalit ni ana sa 2010 is only 8.09 worth of goods and services. Okay? So that is how you're going to apply in correcting variables in inflation, comparing dollar figures from time to time. Okay. Okay. Okay, again, now, the reason why economists must emphasize or put emphasis on comparing dollar figures from different times is your assignment, diba? Your explanation should be the result of various readings and not just a mere copy paste from the internet. So I would expect that you would actually would be able to explain thoroughly, whether in your own words, why it is important for us to, o ikaw as an economic analyst, now why it is necessary for you to compare dollars or dollar figures from different times now. Okay. Okay, so you have your active learning 4, which is comparing tuition increases. Okay. So here is the instructions. Express the 1990 tuition figures in 2010 dollars. Then compute the percentage increase for all 3 types of schools. Which type experienced the largest increase in real tuition cost? So that is what you're going to do in your active learning 4. Okay, a sort of computation. Pila na inyo activity? Active learning 1, active learning 3, active learning 4, and 1 assignment. Okay? So, hapit na dito mahuman. My God, my all, my everything. Okay, let's go to correcting variables still for inflation, the indexation. Okay, so humana to sa comparing dollars from time to time. Let's go to indexation. As we have just seen, the price indexes are used to correct now for the effects of inflation when comparing dollar figures from different times. This type of correction shows up in many places in the economy when some dollar amount is automatically corrected for changes in the price level. By law or by contract, the amount is said to be indexed for inflation. For example, many long-term contracts between firms and unions include partial or complete indexation of the wage to the consumer price index. Such a provision is called a cost of living allowance or COLA. A COLA automatically rises when the COLA automatically raises the wage when the consumer price index rises. So, when you work someday, ako na ihalas ko siya nga ng COLA. Okay, when I was working here at the College of Maasin, so man yung salary na after like 2 years, there is now an adjustment, no, a COLA. Ang tingnan ko, unsa ng Coca-Cola, joke. So, I was a little bit of kanang confused, no, nganong na ay adjustment. Kay mao di ay ni. So, this is how it is when the what you call that? Nawa nas ma'am. So, when the CPI, no, increases, of course, the COLA also automatically raises now the wage, the salary or whatever it is that you are going to term it, no? Okay. Ning taas man ang CPI, so of course, there is an adjustment in the kanang cost of living allowance in order to maintain that economic well-being of a person or consumer. So indexation is also a feature of many laws. Social security benefits, for example, are adjusted every year to compensate the elderly for increases in prices. Now, the brackets of the federal income tax, the income levels at which the tax rates change, are also indexed for inflation. There are, however, many ways in which the tax system is not indexed for inflation even when perhaps it should be. No? How, technically, what the book says is that CPI, the CPI determines the COLA in many multi-year labor contracts. No? Sa college umasin, it's like yearly ang COLA, no? And then adjustments also in social security payments and federal income tax brackets, no? It is also determined by CPI. So, maka-imagine no, CPI is really important, no? The computation of CPI, no, is really fundamental, no? So, mga na siya. Okay, let's go to real versus nominal interest rate. Okay, so correcting economic variables for the effects of inflation is particularly important and somehow tricky when we look at data on interest rates. The very concept of an interest rate necessarily involves comparing amounts of money at different points in time. So, example, when you deposit your savings in a bank account, you give the bank some money now, and the bank returns your deposit with interest in the future. Similarly, when you borrow from a bank, you get some money now, but you will have to repay the loan with interest in the future. Now, in both cases, to fully understand the deal between you and the bank, it is crucial to acknowledge that future dollars could have a different value than today's dollars. That is, if you have to correct for effects of inflation. Okay? So, let's consider this example. So, suppose Sally Saver deposits $1,000 in a bank account that pays an annual interest rate of 10%. A year later, after Sally has accumulated $100 in interest, she withdraws her $1,100 nga money. Is Sally 100 richer than naputol si Isidja. Oy, ako na namang basahan kid sa richer than she was when she made the deposit a year earlier. So the question is, mas dato ba si Sally by $100 than by the time that she deposits the money a year earlier? Now, the answer to this question depends on what we mean by richer. So, Sally does have 100 more than she had before. In other words, the number of dollars in her possession has risen, of course, by 10%. Kay 1,000 naman to iya deposit. And then after a year, she has 100. No? So she had 1,100. So nasa 10% nga increase. But Sally does not care about the amount of money itself. She cares about what she can buy with it. Now comes the value of the money. Now lahi ha ang the money itself and the value of the money, meaning to say how much she can what is the purchasing power of this 1,100 now. If prices have risen while her money was in a bank, each dollar now buys less than it did a year ago. In this case, her purchasing power, the amount of goods and services that she can buy or that her money can buy, has not risen by 10%. Sumona siya. So again, if ang prices ning Saka while her money was in the bank, so each dollar now buys less than it did a year ago. So, which means that her purchasing power has not risen by 10%. So, let's, to keep things simple, let's keep things simple. Let's suppose that Sally is a movie fan and buys only DVDs when Sally made her deposit. Katong ning deposit sa 1,000. A DVD at her local movie store cost $10. Her deposit of 1,000 was equivalent to 100 DVDs. Diba? Kay tag 10 man ang each DVDs. So a year later, after getting her 10% interests from the bank, she has 1,100. Diba? How many DVDs can she buy now? Now, it depends on what has happened to the price of a DVD. And here are some examples. So, the first one is zero inflation. If the price of a DVD remains at 10, by the time katong ning deposit siya at 10 gihapon, after a year, nga gikuha na niya ang iyang 1,100. So, with that amount, she can buy, her purchasing power has also kanang ning taas pod kay makapalit naman siya from 100 DVDs to 110 kay 1,100 naman ay kwarta. So if that is the case, if there is zero inflation, then the purchasing power of Sally or the money of Sally has increases. The 10% increase in the number of dollars means a 10% increase in her purchasing power. Nakuha? Kinahanglang makuha. Second, so in this second scenario, there is now a 6% inflation. So if the price of a DVD rises from 10 to 10.60, then the number of DVDs she can buy has risen from 100 to approximately 104. So do your calculations. So kung tag 10.60 ang DVD, so pila ka book ang mapalit niya sa 1,100. So approximately 104. Sakto de. Sige, do your mental calculations diha sa inyong balay while listening to this video. Sakto nga kuan 104 ang iyahang mapalit. Okay, sakto kay when you divide 1,100 over 10.60, you will come up with 103.77 something. So round it up, so 104. So this means that her purchasing power has increased by about 4% only, not 10%. Even if iyang money ni-increase og 10%. Increase man jud og 10% iyang money, di ba? From 1,000 to 1,100. But the purchasing power, because there is now 6% inflation, has only increased by about 4%. Okay? Okay, situation number 3. There is now a 10% inflation. If the price of a DVD rises from 10 to 11, she can still buy 100 DVDs. Diba? 1,100 divided by 11 equals 100 DVDs. So even though Sally's dollar wealth has risen by figures from 1,000 to 1,100, her purchasing power is still the same. Kaysa unang panahon, ang mapalit sa 1,000 nga DVD is 100 nga DVD. Ang mapalit po niya karon, no, nga gikuha na ni isang kwarta, is still 100 DVDs because of 10% inflation. Okay? Situation number 4, 12% inflation. If the price of a DVD increases from $10 to 11.20, the number of DVDs she can buy has fallen from 100 to approximately 98 pieces of DVD. So even with her greater number of dollars, so di ba ang isang kwarta kani increase from 1,000 to 1,100, her purchasing power has decreased by about 2% because she can only buy 98 DVDs. So this is the beauty, no, of correcting variables for inflation. No, kay makaibaw ka ilad day kas bangko, ala nakaginansya ko na, pero look, you have to check, no, the purchasing power of your money from the time that you deposit and by the time that you will withdraw your money. So dapat well versed ka sa mga inflation. You can predict man pod if there would be inflation changes, no, na aman jud na ma-predict man nimo ng inflation, although not that exact, but at least you will have a guide, no. I mean ka, ay di sa ko mo withdraw kay kuan taas ang inflation ron or mabuang or whatever it is. Okay, so mo na siya. Here is another scenario. Do guys, this is that. And if Sally were living in an economy with deflation, no, or the falling prices, another possibility could arise. So say for example, 2% deflation. If the price of a DVD falls from 10 to 9.80, then the number of DVDs she can buy rises from 100 to approximately 112. So which means that her purchasing power increases by about 12%, more than the increase in the figure of 10%. Now these examples, no, shows that the higher the rate of inflation, the smaller the increase in Sally's purchasing power. If the rate of inflation exceeds the rate of interest, her purchasing power actually falls. And if there is deflation, that is a negative rate of inflation, her purchasing power rises by more than the rate of the interest. So, mao na siya. Okay? Okay, let's go to this. To understand how much a person earns in savings account, we need mag-savings sad mo, no? Okay, so to fully understand, no, this of how much a person earns in a savings account, we need to consider both the interest rates and the change in the prices. Dili ra jud ang interest rate ay mong tan-awon nga mo invest ko ani or mo deposit ko ani kay dako ilang interest rate. You also have to be familiar with the pattern of the changes in prices, no? The interest rate that measures the changing in dollar amounts is called the nominal interest rate, and the interest rate corrected for inflation called the real interest rate. Now, the nominal interest rate, the real interest rate, and inflation are related approximately as follows. So, mauna siya. Real interest rate is equal to nominal interest rate minus inflation interest rate. The real interest rate is the difference between the nominal interest rate and the rate of inflation. The nominal interest rate tells you how fast the number of dollars in your bank account rises over time, while the real interest rate tells you how fast the purchasing power of your bank account rises over time. Gets? Okay, so here is an example. So assuming that you have a deposit of 1,000 again for 1 year. So the nominal interest rate is 9%, and during that year, inflation is 3.5%. So let's compute now the real interest rate, which is equals to nominal interest rate minus the inflation rate. So 9.0% minus 3.5% equals 5.5%. Now, the purchasing power of your $1,000 deposit has grown by 5.5%. So, that is how you're going to compute whether or not you're going to gain or di ba mo gain ang imong deposits. Okay? So, here we have this figure that shows the real interest rate is the difference between the nominal interest rate and the rate of inflation. Di ba? Even our, sa itawag anak ka ng formula. No? The nominal rate tells you how fast the number of dollars in your bank account rises over time, while the real interest rate tells you how fast the purchasing power of your bank account rises over time. So, makita nimo diha ang nominal interest rate kuno kaning blue, this one, kaning blue, the blue one, nominal interest rate tells you how fast the number of dollars in your bank account rises. So, nga ni kataas ang imong the figures in your bank account rises. But the red one, no, the real interest rate tells you how fast the purchasing power ha, the value that your money, kaning blue, can buy rises over time. So, karon lihiro na ka. So, sa mga buhaton, manto ka karos bangko, mga joke ka, hindi bitaw joke. So, nga na siya. So, mga karon, how can we tell? No? There are a lot of data available in the internet as to the real and nominal interest rates. That is in the US gani. We can also search for the Philippines. No? Naana sila mga data. That is for people's consumption. Of course, para guided pud ang tao whether or not padayon ba siya sa iyang pag-deposit or dili. Kay basin og it would be a wise idea to invest and not just to deposit. Depende lagi of how fast, no, your purchasing power. So, if ako'y pabuton, I reduce purchasing power, not in the number of dollars. Because it could be that there is an increase in the number of figures, but the purchasing power is declining or decreasing. Okay? So, by summary, now the Consumer Price Index is a measure of the cost of living. The CPI tracks the cost of the typical consumer basket of goods and services. Now, the CPI is used to make a cost of living adjustments, now, and to correct economic variables for effects of inflation. And the real interest rate is corrected for inflation and is computed by subtracting the inflation rate from the nominal interest rate. And that's it for our lesson, which is the measuring of cost of living. I hope that you have learned something out of this discussion. And take note of the assignment and the activity. Okay, so I will be making submission links in Moodle, so you have check on them for the deadline of submission. Okay, and I will just announce in our group chat kung kano sa ata mag virtual class because we will going to check your output, no, to tan-awon og nakamao ba mo out of the discussion. Okay, and that's it, kids. So, annyeong!